All right. Good morning, everybody. Today we'll do a kind of a last little, very, very short review because I only had two people email me with things they wanted me to go over. So I'm going to go over those two things really quick. Both of them were kind of on the same thing. One asked specifically for models. The other one asked for some characteristics that are kind of related to the models. So I'll kind of go over those things as well today. There are 10 models. Essentially in this class. There are some of them which you will not have to talk about on this test. Okay, so anything related to the last couple units. So when we talked about all of those city models, like the multiple nuclei model, sector model, things like that, those are not going to be on there. Okay, now central place theory, things like that. Now, can you use those models in your answer if you're talking about something else? Absolutely, you can. So that's something that you can definitely use. So if you need some ideas for things from the last couple chapters related to industry to kind of illustrate a point that you're trying to make, by all means, definitely use them because that's going to help you because you're going kind of beyond the scope of what they're asking you to do for the purposes of this test. So that will definitely help you. Okay, so I'm going to start with the demographic transition model, and we've talked about this obviously in the video about a week ago, so you can go back and watch that video for a little bit more in-depth analysis. But I just want to kind of start with this chart here. Okay, you can see that in stage 1 countries, of which we have none of anymore, we have really high birth rates, really high death rates, kind of around the same as each other. Because of that, our natural increase rate is basically 0. So we're seeing virtually no population growth because we have roughly the same number of people dying as being born. Now, stage 2 countries, birth rates stay high, so this is a lot of sub-Saharan Africa today. During this stage, death rates, you can see which are high at the beginning of stage 2, start to drop. And they start to drop because of the introduction of modern medicine, some things like that. So death rates begin to drop. And because of that, you see this huge spike in the natural increase rate. So populations are growing exponentially, basically, in stage 2. Huge increases in population. Natural increase rate skyrockets. Stage 3, we start to see women get more rights in some of these countries. We start to see increased or improved child mortality rates. Therefore, people aren't needing to have 6 kids to hope that 4 survive to adulthood. So what you see in stage 3 countries is that birth rates start to fall. Now, death rates continue to fall because in stage 3 countries, health improvements are starting to get better. We're starting to see some improvements there. Now, stage 4 countries, again, so look at stage 3, look at natural increase. Natural increase rate is still positive, meaning that it's above the x-axis, but it's starting to decline because you can see that the birth rates and the death rates, birth is still greater than death, so population is going up, but they're getting closer to each other because of that natural increase rate starts to fall. Now, in stage 4, this graph kind of drew it where death rates kind of come up a little bit. They basically start to level off in stage 4 countries. Birth rates start to actually drop, such that at the end of stage 4, birth rates meet death rates. And when birth equals death, then the natural increase rate goes back to 0. And you can see there at the end of stage 4, birth rate, when birth rate hits death rate, natural increase hits the x-axis. Now, in stage 5 countries, those are countries in which the death rate exceeds the birth rate. And because of that, the natural increase rate, which this graph doesn't show, is actually negative. So we do have several stage 5 countries in the world that are significant. So that is demographic transition model. So Japan, obviously a stage 5. U.S., if we limit immigration, would be a stage 5 country. So those are some stage 5s where you start to see that. So that's demographic transition model. So at this point, I hope you know this model. Okay, very, very important. Epidemiological transition. So this is kind of the same model, but sort of different in that it's adding on diseases to this. Okay. Now, in stage 1 countries, what are people dying from? Well, we don't have stage 1 countries anymore, so they're pretty much dying from things that we've cured. So we don't have the plague anymore. As bad as coronavirus is, it's not the plague. It's not going to kill a third of the world's population. So you see stage 1 countries, people dying from really, really infectious diseases. So the plague would be that. So high accrued death rate, places where we have very little medicine. Obviously, in stage 1 countries, back when they existed, there was virtually no medicine. So when people got sick, there was nothing to treat them with. Now, stage 2 countries, we see the increase of pandemics. And the big one that they talked about in the book was cholera. So we talked about the water pumps with cholera. You saw other pandemics that were existing. Ebola would be one of them, kind of more modern example in northern Africa that we saw there. Again, you have diseases that are spreading rapidly. They're killing a lot of people. We're having a pandemic like we have here. Diseases are spreading very, very rapidly. Cholera was obviously spreading from the water, so that was something where people who were drinking water were getting sick because of that. So you see these rapidly spreading diseases in places where you don't have great medicine. You do have some medicines. Remember, stage 2 countries, death rates were starting to fall because we had the introduction of modern medicine. So we do have some medicines. We have some way in which we can treat things. Sanitation, nutrition's a little bit better than stage 1 countries, so that we see improvements there. Stage 3 countries and stage 4 countries were basically dying from the same thing. So stage 3 were dying from infectious diseases, cancer, heart disease, stroke, things like that. Stage 4 were dying from the same diseases. The one big difference is that in stage 4, we have what's known as delayed degenerative diseases. What that means is that we have developed medicinal treatments that allow people to survive longer with those same diseases. So people today can get an artificial heart valve, can get chemotherapy for cancer, and either prolong their life or in some cases put cancer into remission. So that's something that exists today, which helps people live longer. So that's stage 4. And then we have stage 5 countries. Okay, stage 5 countries really, and this is if you read this slide that we talked about back in September, everything on here is coronavirus. I mean, everything on here. So you have evolution of disease. So you have infectious diseases that evolve and establish a resistance to drugs. So if you look at some of the, there's been some new studies out there showing there's different forms now of the coronavirus, some potentially more deadly than others. Disease has evolved over time. It takes a while to deal with new strains of viruses and bacteria. So again, we've had coronaviruses before. This one is unique. It's a different one. This is something that has kind of evolved and changed from previous coronaviruses. Poverty, who are the people who are most at risk here? Well, it's obviously people who can't afford treatment. So it's somebody who doesn't necessarily go and get a screening because maybe they don't have a doctor to order a screen or something like that. Obviously, we know the elderly are very at risk for this, but lower income people are going to be much more at risk than somebody who has the money to go to the doctor, potentially get in there early, get it treated, or get some of the experimental drugs that they have now before they develop the vaccine. And then finally, increased connections. This is how this thing spread. Okay, look at increased connections. Every country in this world interacts with somebody, some other country. So when the disease starts in China, it went to the U.S. and it went to Europe. Well, from there, people spread out everywhere, and because of that, the disease is now everywhere. So increased connections have made it easier for people to infect people in different places. So these stage 5 diseases show that a lot of our prominent countries in the world are getting to this stage. And because of this, we're seeing these global pandemics as opposed to sometimes what we saw in stage 2 countries, which was much more regional pandemics. People were dying in large numbers in a country, but people weren't leaving that country and going all over the place. Well, stage 5 countries, they definitely are. Okay, so demographic transition, epidemiological transition, those are both essentially the same model. They might reference them a little bit differently there. We also, when we talk about these things, I want to kind of bring back in Thomas Malthus just to kind of refresh your memory on this. Malthus was the guy who said that eventually population would grow faster than food supply. We're all going to starve to death and die. Obviously, that didn't happen on a global scale. We have the Neo-Malthusian school, which is referenced pretty regularly if you watch the College Board's review videos. The Neo-Malthusians basically say that while that hasn't happened globally, it has definitely happened on a regional scale. So we do have places in the world where there are more people than there is food. And because of that, we're seeing problems with people having enough food to eat. So that is definitely a problem on the regional scale. So if you hear Malthus, just make sure you know that he's the one who predicted that the food supply could not keep up with population growth. Okay, the next kind of model or set of laws I would like you to know are what are known as Ravenstein's laws. And Ravenstein's laws, this kind of goes back to chapter 3 when we talked about migration. And we kind of talked about the characteristics of migrants. Okay, and I can kind of summarize this. Let's see if I can kind of find a couple slides that really look at this. So obviously, when we talked about push and pull factors, so obviously this is some of the characteristics. So Ravenstein's laws basically looked at the characteristics of migrants. So the first of his laws basically said that the majority of migration worldwide is short distance. So it's not someone moving from one country to another. It's a person moving from one city to another, or one person moving within a city. If I buy a new house within the Northmont district, that's the normal migration that we see in the world. It's not international migration. It's less than 10% of people on Earth will be international migrants at any point in their life. So for permanent migration. So this is something that is not super common to have international. Now, when people move, there are push and pull factors that lead them from a place and lead them to a place. So that could be a political factor, such as restricted rights that you may have in an area. If you're a woman in a country and you don't have any rights, that may lead you to move to a country where you have greater rights. So the push factor would be lack of rights. The pull factor would be having rights. It could be environmental, such as a hurricane destroys your house. So you're going to move to a place that has less possibility of being hit by a hurricane. Or it could be economic. I might live in the Great Lakes states and lose my job in manufacturing and want to go to a place that has better jobs. So there will be push and pull factors. So that's part of Ravenstein's laws as well, is that every move will have a push and pull factor. Then he talked about characteristics of migrants. So remember, males are most likely to migrate out of countries. Most international migration is adults and is rarely households. And by that I mean families with kids. That tends to not happen a lot in terms of international migration. Those who are migrating long distances tend to migrate into cities. That's kind of the big idea of international migration. Large towns, particularly if you look at the United States, grow more today through migration than they do through birth rate. So there are more people moving into New York City or Los Angeles or San Francisco from out of the United States than there are people who are being born there in any given year. And the last thing is that the major pattern of migration is from developing countries to developed countries. Now, there was one slide here at the beginning that I wanted to kind of revisit here, which talked about kind of the link between this model and the demographic transition model. So remember, stage 1 countries don't exist anymore. But when stage 1 countries did exist, migration was tended to be daily or seasonal in terms of food. So this kind of links to the agriculture unit, pastoral nomadism. So can you see here how they might have a question on this topic that's going to cover a bunch of different units? They could talk about the demographic transition model. They could talk about stage 1 countries. They could link it to migration transition. They could then turn around and link that to agriculture that you see in different areas. So you could take this one topic and you could apply a bunch of different units to it. That's what they're talking about doing on this test, to give students massive opportunities to talk about different units in the class to show what you know. Stage 2 countries, high international emigration. So remember, emigration with an E means exit. So that's people leaving stage 2 countries, okay? And then within those countries, we're seeing movement from rural to urban areas. So people are moving from the country into the cities. Remember, those countries are most likely to have primate cities, that one big city where international investment occurs. So people are more likely to move into those cities because that's where jobs are. Stage 3 countries have high international immigration, meaning with an I, meaning in, so people moving to those countries. Now, we do see, and that's movement from stage 2 countries, so it's 2 to 3. You do still see some outward migration from stage 3 countries, but that's usually from stage 3 to stage 4. So generally people are looking to improve their living conditions, so 3 to 4, but 2 to 3. Within stage 3 countries, you're starting to see some intra-regional migration. So this is where we were 50, 60, 70 years ago, where you're starting to see movement of people from the cities into the suburbs. Now we have jobs, now we have transportation, we have infrastructure, people can move a little bit farther away. Stage 4 countries, same as stage 3, but now people are moving a little bit even farther away. Now we're seeing people move out into rural areas because interstates and highways allow them to move from point A to point B relatively quickly still. So we're just seeing a little bit farther migration now. So Ravenstein's laws really talk about the movement of people, where they move from, and kind of the process there. So that would be the second of the big of the big models. So demographic transitions 1, Ravenstein is 2. 3 is Wallerstein's model. So Wallerstein's model is just simply the core periphery model. So we basically have all the countries in the world, and we classify them as core, semi-periphery, and periphery. So our core countries are our developed countries: the United States, Great Britain, Germany, Japan, countries like that. The semi-periphery are the countries that have some degree of development, but they're the countries that the core uses in order to make their stuff. So this would be Mexico. So Mexico has, we can make our cars in Mexico because they have more lax environmental regulations, they have cheaper labor, things like that. So they're going to be a semi-periphery country serving the core. Now, because they're a semi-periphery country and they're close by, we're going to invest in development there. So we're going to move, we're going to have development in Mexico, increase kind of the technological aspect of their country because we need them. We need them to make our stuff. Particularly things that are heavy to move, so we want to have them be close to our market, which we'll talk about bulk reducing here in a second. Okay, but they're a semi-periphery country, and then everybody outside that is the periphery. Why do we not make stuff in Africa? Because it's too far to ship it. It costs too much to ship it here. So they're not close to any major world markets, minus the African markets, which are few and far between compared to the developed world. So we don't make a lot of stuff in those countries. So they're the periphery. They're a source of resources, whether it be agricultural or supplies that are needed to make stuff in the semi-periphery to serve the core. So that's Wallerstein's model. So a very simple model, but you just got to remember, you hear the name Wallerstein, that would be core periphery. Okay, we then have von Thunen's model. And then von Thunen's model, so number 4, is those concentric rings. And those concentric rings basically talk about where things are in relation to the market. So you have the market or the central business district in the middle, okay? And the first ring outside of that is anything that's perishable. So it could be dairy products like milk. It could be like things you would grow at a farmer's market. So if you think of somebody who grows food in their backyard and they take it to a farmer's market, they're probably somebody who lives fairly close to a city. Okay, it could be somebody who lives around the Northmont area, going to take their things to a farmer's market. They're fairly close to a city. Chances are they don't have an enormous farm. They might, but chances are they're growing things on a few acres. They're going to take that and sell that for some additional revenue at a farmer's market. You're going to see that closer to the city because those are perishable goods. They got to get them sold quick because they're agricultural products. Now, outside of that first. So we have the central business district is in the middle. So the first ring outside of that is dairy or perishable. The ring outside of that is forest. So that's when we're going to have our trees because we want to make sure that we can take those trees and make them into products because they're heavy to ship. So we're going to see some development there because we're going to have factories that are taking those raw goods and turning them into smaller goods. So those are bulk reducing products. So you're going to see that in that second ring. So you're going to see a little bit of development outside of the dairy ring. You're going to see some development in the forest area because we're taking those trees and making them into other products. Now, outside of that is where you're going to see most of your agriculture. So you're going to see your large-scale farms in the third ring. So the places where you would see the heavy machinery for acres and acres and acres of corn. While those products are, to some degree, perishable. Corn, you can ship that over a longer period of time. Not a whole lot of trouble. Wheat, things like that, much more than you can ship tomatoes, which are most likely things that are probably grown, at least around here, in a farmer's market type thing that you would see. Peppers that you might grow in your garden, which you got to eat within a few weeks. So those are things that are much more perishable. And then the farthest out ring is cattle. So this is where we're going to raise our beef. Areas that take a lot of land, a lot of water. Sometimes they're taking resources that they get from the farms in ring 3 and using that to feed their cattle out in ring 4. So those are things that need to be kind of close to each other. So von Thunen's model basically talks about proximity to market. Now, obviously, things have changed with the advent of transportation that we didn't have many, many years ago. So these models are a little bit outdated, but it still does kind of show you the general makeup of what cities look like. So there was an AP question a few years ago where they had a picture of a truck, a pickup truck that was basically loaded to go to like a farmer's market. And then they had a picture of a field, where cows were grazing. And they basically said, where in von Thunen's model would you expect to find each of these things? So the farmer's market would obviously be in that first ring outside of the core. Okay, cattle would be in the far outside ring. So there's a video I was going to draw your attention to. The College Board did. They actually did a video on model review. So if you just go out here, AP Human Geography Models Review, that will take you out to a video. They kind of go over a few of these that I don't think are super important, but I'm going to touch on very briefly. But they go into a lot of detail on some of these, and they actually go through that AP question where they show you some pictures of some things and kind of walk you through how you get where. So if you're confused about this at all, just Google AP Human Geography Models, and the very first video that pops up is the models review that they did through the College Board, which is actually really, really good. Give you some good information there. Okay, so that's von Thunen's model. The next one I want you to know is Rostow's model. So Rostow was the guy who did the 5 stages of development for a country. So we basically have countries that start off in what we call a traditional economy, which is very agricultural based, really not having any industry at all. We then have stage 2, which is what we call preconditions for takeoff. So some sort of spark is created within that country. So whether it be an outside spark where like the United States comes in and says, hey, we want to build a factory in your country, or it could be something internal where somebody comes up with some sort of idea like happened with the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain and then later in the US where we had this idea and that idea kind of sparked the economy and changed the economy within the country. So something happens in stage 2, preconditions for takeoff, and then in stage 3 is takeoff. So obviously in stage 3 the economy really starts to grow, oftentimes only around that one industry. So it could be the automobile industry, it could be textiles that you're now mass producing. Whatever the case may be, you're generally growing around one major industry. Stage 4 is what we call the drive to maturity. Now you're taking what you've learned in that industry and you're applying it to other things. So we have the assembly line that we use to create the automobile. Well, then we started applying that assembly line concept to a lot of things, even to fast food, where we could mass produce a lot of hamburgers at McDonald's and sell them really quickly, and you can just kind of apply that assembly line concept to our food system. We do that right now in our meat producing plants, and that's why we've had so many problems with those meat producing plants shutting down because of coronavirus, is that we have that idea of people just standing shoulder to shoulder doing the same job over and over again all day. We've kind of applied that to our food production here in the United States. So that's stage 4, drive to maturity, applying this to other industries. And then stage 5 is what we call age of mass consumption. And in the age of mass consumption, now a country has shifted from making stuff to consuming stuff. So this is the United States today. We still make a lot of stuff in the United States, but we also are consuming a lot of things that we don't make. So that could be food, it could be cheap products that we get from countries like China, it could be automobiles that we get from countries like Mexico, it could be all sorts of things. So we consume more than we produce. So we've gotten to the point where we're so advanced and things cost so much to produce them here that it's cheaper to make a lot of things elsewhere and just consume them here. And that's this idea of the age of mass consumption. So that's our 5th stage there. Last big theory is Weber's least cost theory, and that's the idea of bulk gaining and bulk reducing. So I just want to make sure you remember that name, Weber, W-E-B-E-R. Weber's least cost theory basically says that you're going to produce goods closest to the thing that minimizes transportation costs. So if I'm taking a tree and making it into a table, shipping a tree is more expensive than shipping a table. Therefore, I'm going to want to produce my factory I'm going to have my factory close to the forest. So that would be a bulk reducing product. I'm taking something big and I'm making it smaller. If, however, I'm taking something small and making it big, like all the components that go into a car and producing a car, I want to produce that car near my market, which is why Mexico is such a key player now in kind of this idea of the core periphery model, because as the U.S. population has shifted south and west, it's now much closer to Mexico. Therefore, we can make the cars cheaper in Mexico because they're a semi-periphery country, and we can ship them right across the border to the U.S. into where the population centers are now, down in Texas and Arizona and California, and even Georgia and Florida, Louisiana, and have those cars be closer to market than if we produced them in Detroit or Buffalo or Toledo or something like that. So much, much closer to the market. So that's the idea of Weber's least cost theory. Now, if you watch the video on Models Review here, she touches on a couple other things that in our book very briefly mention them, and I just want to go over these just in case you hear them One is by a guy by the name of Carl Sauer, and we briefly mentioned this in class. He developed what he called the cultural landscape. And the idea of the cultural landscape is basically that the culture of an area is basically defined by some sort of combination of factors that are related to that area. So it could be the language that people speak. It could be the economy of a region. It could be the religion that's practiced in a in a region. It could be the food that they eat. And we know that food is very heavily based on geography. So what they're able to produce, how long their growing seasons are, things like that. All of those things help to define the cultural landscape of an area. So when we talk about cultural landscape, we're not talking about necessarily if there's mountains or rivers or things like that. Obviously, that plays a role in the types of foods that people may eat, or if a group's isolated, like the Basque people in the Pyrenees Mountains between Spain and France, that has kept them isolated and maintain their culture. It's a big part of the cultural landscape, but it's not, when we talk about cultural landscape, we're talking about all those different elements of culture that we talked about. So race and ethnicity, language, religion, what their industries or what their economy is based on, the foods that they eat, things like that. All of those help to define the cultural landscape. So if you hear the name Carl Sauer, or if you hear cultural landscape, that's what they're talking about. And then the last thing that she mentioned that I want to talk about is the heartland versus rimland theory. And we mentioned this, and I actually mentioned this a few days ago in one of the review videos. Heartland versus rimland theory was this idea of basically where did civilization really begin, and what region of the world do you want to control in order to really have dominant control of the world? So remember, back hundreds and hundreds of years ago, there was no United States, there was no Western Hemisphere, really. We were looking at everything very Europe, Asia, Africa centric, because that was really the part of the world that we knew. So the heartland theory was basically saying that if you controlled that region of Eastern Europe, Russia, over into China, chances are you had a good chance to control the vast majority of the world, because you controlled a lot of resources. Look at the oil that we see in Russia. Look at the natural gas, all the coal, all of the things that we see that we see in the United States, we also see over there. So the heartland theory basically says if you can control that region, you ultimately control the world. Rimland theory was kind of the counter to that, which basically said, if you look at where civilization began, it was really in the Middle East, and it was really around the Tigris and Euphrates and Mesopotamia, down in modern-day Iraq and Saudi Arabia and Iran and places like that. And the Rimland theory basically says you don't really need to control your Eastern Europe and Russia and northern parts of China. If you control Western Europe, if you control the Middle East, the area kind of around that, it's Western Europe, and it's the Middle East, and it's kind of wrapping over into India and Southeast Asia and Japan. If you control that region of the world, ultimately you will control the world. And if you kind of look at it from a modern context, is that that's where we have a lot of resources, obviously, in Great Britain and Western Europe. We have all of the world's oil in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East that we see down in there. We have large food supplies that we see in countries like India and southern China, and technology in Japan and things like that. So obviously these are old theories that predate a lot of the modern things that we see in the world today, but those are two kind of conflicting theories about what you ultimately control. Now the West, the North and South America, aren't included in these theories at all, because when they were initially developed, we weren't even really a thing, and when they were kind of thinking about world domination and world control. So we're not really in that picture, but it's really kind of looking at where power is centered around the world. So if you look at Hitler and Stalin and people during World War II, they were all really sought to control the heartland. They were trying to control, Hitler wanted to go into Eastern Europe, and he tried to conquer Russia. So he was really trying to move into the heartland. He wasn't really as much, I mean, he did a little bit in Northern Africa and things like that, but he really wasn't trying to go into the Rimland region. He was obviously attacking Great Britain, but he stayed out of, for the most part, Spain and Portugal. He was allied with Franco down there, and he really stayed out of Italy because of Mussolini. So like there were areas in the Rimland that he really didn't go into, but he was really trying to control the heartland, kind of the middle part of Europe and into the western part of Asia. That really was kind of his area of control. Okay, so that's Rimland versus Heartland theory. Chances are you're not going to see that on the test, but they did mention that in that review video, so I wanted to kind of draw attention to that. Okay, I think that answers the two questions I had on the Google form. So if you have any other questions, please send me an email. Tomorrow I will get on the Google Meet at noon I'll be on there till about 3 o'clock. Obviously, if you don't have any questions, you're good for the test. You are in good shape. You don't have to jump on there. If you have any specific questions you would like me to answer, please jump on there at any point between 12 and 3. I'll be happy to answer those. Please remember to check the email that I sent on Sunday. It goes over what you need to do at the top of each page on your submission. Remember, you need your AP ID and your initials on each page. That you're submitting. So if you're just typing this and copying and pasting it over into the submission form, you just need to do that once for each question. Make sure you do it for the second question as well. And you can pre-do those pages now. You can kind of prep those pages out in Google Drive, in Google Docs, or in Word, or whatever you happen to be using. Do that now. The other thing, please pay attention to the things in my email. The College Board, once again on Sunday night, tweeted out that they've already voided dozens and dozens of exams now because they've caught a group of students trying to set up a network to cheat. So they voided those exams already. If you have open on your computer a document that is shared with anybody, that could be a paper that you turned in to me, because there are teachers across the country who probably try to help students on this exam. And I'm definitely not doing that, okay? I'm going to help you be as prepared as possible, but I'm not taking it for you. So you need to make sure that you are as prepared as possible. So no documents that are shared with anybody. If you have anything open on your device, they will have software that they say can detect that. And if that's the case, they will void exams. So please make sure that you're not using some shared doc that you're all communicating with each other with. I will get a copy of all of your test submissions to look for anything that is abnormal. The College Board has tasked teachers this year with being kind of the first line of detection for any sort of cheating. Obviously, I know that the caliber of work that each one of you is able to produce. So if I'm seeing something that's kind of beyond the scope of that will obviously be a red flag for me. Obviously, I hope to not have to do anything like that. But just please take this seriously, and please do it in a way that is academically honest. That's something that I really want to stress. You guys are all great students. You all have the capacity. Everyone who's taken this test has the capacity to pass it without any sort of outside assistance. So integrity is really, really important. So please make sure that you are practicing that and that you're taking this test on your own to the greatest extent, and doing the best you can given the craziness that we're in right now. Obviously, at the end of the day, everybody wants college credit from this class, and I really, really hope that you get it. But at the end of the day, this is just a test. Okay, this is something that you all are prepared for. You're writing against freshmen, so you have all the things in the world going for you. We've prepared the material. You know the material. We've reviewed the material. College Board's made all of these resources out here available to you, so you have all of that kind of in your hands. Do the best you can. Okay, you guys have worked hard this year. I know what you're capable of doing, so let's keep this up. Let's finish strong and do the best that we can on Tuesday. Okay. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'll be available basically 24/7 next few days. I am doing my government Google Meet tomorrow, or not tomorrow. You guys will be watching this on Monday, but I'm doing it on Monday. So today from 12 to 3. So if you shoot me an email between 12 and 3 and I don't respond immediately, it's probably because I'm on with my government students because they're taking their test today. And then you guys will have yours obviously tomorrow. So need anything, let me know. Again, just a reminder, Dr. Inkrot was supposed to send out a one call on Sunday. He did, but it didn't cover the thing it was supposed to cover, which was a reminder for AP students that your iPads and your books and stuff are not due today. So if you're coming for cap and gown stuff today, you do not have to bring your book and your iPad if you need it for the AP test. If you're taking the AP test on your computer at home and you don't need your iPad and you're not going to use your textbooks, you got notes and you got all your other stuff, you want to turn that in, by all means feel free to do that. But you do not have to. There's an AP collection date on May 22nd from 11 to 5. I will be up there running that day, so I'll be kind of overseeing AP collection that day. So I want to see you guys all again. So stop in that day, turn in your stuff. I'll get it from you, and then you'll be ready to go. Hope everybody has a great day. Congratulations. I know graduations will be this upcoming weekend. Sorry I can't be in there in person this year because of the limitations that we have, but I've been really happy to have all of you in class this year. Good luck this week, and I will talk to you soon.